Hello and welcome to this Secure Things webinar. Today what we're going to do is cover certificates, and we'll have a look at how they're used in the IoT secure world. So as you can see, we've got quite a packed agenda, so no further ado, let's move on. So what are we going to learn? So we are going to learn about the certification process, the authorities that are used in the part of the process, in the PKI process. So we'll look at certificate authorities and registration authorities. We'll delve into the actual details of a certificate and actually see the information that's held therein. We'll talk about certificate chains and the root certificate. So this webinar is targeted at engineers who are thinking of developing an IoT product and managers who wish to control and manage the secure development of such a project. So let's have a look at the four categories of security just as a summary. So confidentiality, so this is where encryption is key, where information can be seen by a man in the middle, should we say, and he cannot get to the real information because of the encryption method used. Trust, so this is where the data is known to come from a known source. It's not been altered, so you can check the integrity. We use hashing and identity to ensure trust. Non-repudiation, this is very important, especially in financial transactions, whereby you can not deny that you actually sent the information. So it's like a contractual legal part of security. And then availability covers the backing up of a system that's gone down through to some sort of trust issue or hacking has taken it out of service. So let's first talk about registration authorities. So these guys, they carry out checks on users. So they're the guys that do the legwork to ensure that the person that you say you are is actually true. And they verify that. So they basically verify your identity, and they use a specific process, and we call that the certificate practice statement. The registration authority, they follow the public key infrastructure process, and they use it to issue, validate, manage, and revoke certificates. They can also generate public-private key pairs if you don't wish to do that yourself as a user. And they instruct certificate authorities to issue certificates once they're happy that you are you. Examples of registration authorities I've got here, Let's Encrypt, Komodo, etc. Now a certificate authority, this is just the entity that issues the certificate and public keys once they've been given permission by the registration authority. Now the two can actually be the same company or entity, and Embedded Trust, which is a tool which is available from Secure Things in collaboration with IR Systems, is effectively a certificate authority because as you're developing your product using the tool, it will create the public-private key pairs and certificates for you. Of course, this is only to be used for development purposes because they're not secure because they're held on your PC. But the tool does create those for you, so it is in effect a certificate authority during the development phase. So let's have a look at the registration process just to give you some idea of how it works. So let's say a new PKI user wants to get a certificate, so they can make a request of a certificate to a registration authority. The public-private key pair is securely generated by the registration authority, or the user can actually supply its own public-private key pair. Once the registration authority has done the legwork and checked that the keys are from you, you say you are, etc., the registration authority then submits a certificate request to the certificate authority. The certificate authority verifies the request and then generates the certificate and actually publishes it. So they send it to you and they could publish it on a third-party website. The generated certificate is delivered, as I say, via the registration authority. Now, certificates can be revoked. So this is the process for revocation. So a PKI user requests a revocation. Maybe it's lost its private key, or it's stolen, or it's being compromised, or it wishes to terminate a service. The authorization of the revocation request is checked by the RA, so it makes sure again that you are you and you can actually you are the right person that can make this request. Once the registration authority is happy with that, it then informs the CA, and the CA then invalidates the certificate. And it does the necessary processes by revoking lists, etc., on third-party sites, etc. So let's have a look at these certificates, the actual format themselves. So they're basically defined by the X509 standard. The diagram here shows you what the certificate looks like roughly in that standard. Over here we have a display which you've probably seen on maybe a Windows operating system, which is a display for your certificates that happen to be held on the machine. Now, certificates are actually encoded to allow them to be transmitted easily. There are two types of encoding. There is DER and PEM. Now, DER is actually a binary form, which is obviously difficult to transmit if it's straight binary, so a better version is if we can have it in a textual version, and that's what a PEM format is. Now, the encoding can be cumbersome, especially for small embedded devices, and so sometimes it can be simplified by just simply holding the public key of the certificate. So as I said, DER stands for Distinguished Encoding Rules. It's an encoding method that is used to serialize an ASN.1 data structure. I'll leave that to you to investigate and read up on that standard further. Or there's the PEM, which is the Privacy Enhanced Mail. So this allows you to send certificates via email simply as attaching a text format. So these are the two formats that you'll find for certificates. So the certificate information. So here's a bit more detail of what you'll actually see on the certificate. So here at the top you'll see the hash algorithm type. So basically for these things like this, the key here, it actually tells you the curves and the equations used to generate these keys. So here you can see the key is used a public key, and that it uses Prime 256 version 1 as the curve. Up here, the hashing algorithm for the signatures uses SHA-256, as you can see, and here is the signature of the certificate, again using hash SHA-256. So you can see all the information is actually detailed on the certificate itself. Now there are very many tools available to allow you to read certificates because as you can see with the previous simple text, it's quite difficult to read. So it's better to have some sort of reader that can actually show you the layout much better. Here's one that's standard that comes with Windows, a certificate manager, and here's a open source free certificate viewer that you can get available from the website. Here's the link here, and you can see it shows you information. It actually extracts all the information we've just seen and displays it in a much more readable format. Trust models. So let's have a look at some of the trust models. So there is a European legislation which covers PKI infrastructure. Basically commercial trust centers, so I don't know, things like banks and assurance companies, they can be a trust center, and they're evaluated according to local government regulations. They basically provide end user certification services for citizens if you want a PKI infrastructure as part of your business, or you need a certificate as part of trust. And different countries are connected via the European Bridge Certificate Authority. Now browser trust models are slightly different. So certificates of independent root certificate authorities are held in the operating system certificate store. Now you'll see this on your Windows machine. If you open the certificate viewer, you can see all the trusted certificates that are held within the machine and also within the browser. A new root CA can be easily established using this method, and as I said, browsers or OSs check automatically certification paths from the PKI user to the root CA. So that's done for you as part of the operating system or the browser. It's very much an invisible process, but it's going on in the background to ensure you're safe when you're browsing. So let's have a look at certificate programming. So this is when you're developing an IoT product and you want to actually put a certificate in your device microcontroller. So every IoT device will require some sort of microcontroller or an authentication device, sometimes a secure element. And each IoT device needs to be programmed with firmware. So every IoT device must have a unique identity which is embedded in the silicon. Sometimes that comes out as a silicon ID, or it's programmed in during initial bootloader installation. And this is what we call provisioning, and this is covered in other webinars. So during this provisioning process, a cryptographic key pair and a certificate are typically programmed into the device, and it often uses the unique identifier of the MCU implanted in the certificate. So as we've stated previously, the encoding decoding of a certificate can actually be quite cumbersome, as you've seen with the PEM and the DER format. So we often simplify it when it's stored in an MCU. So a few facts about the MCU certificate. So it's usually handled by the secure boot manager. It resides in integrity protected in secure flash. It's used to send highly sensitive encrypted information to the MCU. It is generally used for the production programmer to authenticate the MCU to check its identity, and is programmed into the MCU during the provisioning process. So let's find out how the certificate actually is used to authenticate the microcontroller and subsequently the IoT product. So the entity, the programming or the mastering tool, which is to send secure information like firmware or keys, other keys, to the MCU, reads the certificate from the MCU. Now these certificates are public. They're publicly known. There's nothing particularly secret on them. What they do have on them is the public key of the microcontroller that you're talking to, or the entity that you're talking to. This certificate that you've read from that device, which again is public, it binds the public key of the MCU through the signature to a PKI system. So it binds that IoT product to a PKI infrastructure. The certificate that's in the MCU has been issued by some sort of certificate authority, which has been signed by that certificate authority's private key, and that's how we form this chain of trust. So why do we need a chain of trust? Why do we need this certificate hierarchy? So it's not a great idea to have the root certificate. So this is the root certificate authority. This is to say this is the entity, the large company that holds all these certificates and does all the checking for you. It's not a good idea for them to hold the root certificate of all your IoT devices. The root certificate private key, which is held by the company, would have to be protected in some sort of HSM. So it's preferable to have the private key of the root certificate highly protected and only used to create or revoke intermediate certificates. So you don't want the private key of these large companies that provide this PK infrastructure. You don't want their private keys to be held in an HSM in a programming center because it's needed there to program the device certificate that's provisioned inside your MCU. That company is not going to let their private key be sent out to HSMs. So we need some sort of intermediate certificate to allow us to not have to implant or remove the root certificate keys from the root authority. So it's preferable to have the root certificate sign product certificates that act as intermediaries. So we'll have this company that has a root certificate or root certificate authority, and they will sign an intermediate certificate and sign it, and then we can use that certificate to create our device certificate. So in this scenario, the product private key is now required in the HSM. So now this private key, which is of the intermediate certificate, is quite happily sitting in an HSM in a programming center. In this setup, an attacker who can access a product private key can only attack the devices associated with this intermediate certificate. So if they got access to the intermediate key, they would have access to all the products signed by that certificate. However, if you can imagine they got hold of the root certificate, they would have access to all the products ever signed and all the intermediate certificates. So the root private key is a bigger prize, and that's why it's held very securely by these root authority companies. So here we have a chain of trust. So this is the whole reason why we have this PKI infrastructure. So here we have the MCU itself. Inside it will be provisioned with a private key, which is kept secret and can only be accessed by the boot manager, and it will have a certificate provisioned into the device, and that certificate is there to give users access to this public key. Now this certificate needs to be trusted, because if it's unloaded from the MCU and given to you, you need to trust it. How do you trust it? Well, on this certificate there will be the name of the issuer. That will be some sort of authority, or maybe an OEM, and that OEM will have signed this certificate. How do you check that this this certificate was signed by this OEM? What you do is you go to this issuer's name, the OEM, and you ask the OEM for its certificate. On that certificate will be its public key. What you can then do is use this public key to check the signature of this device certificate. If it checks out okay, then you definitely know that this certificate, which was in this product, was definitely signed by this guy. Can absolutely be sure. But now, how can you check whether you trust this guy and the certificate you asked to be sent to you from this OEM? How can you trust this certificate? Well, on that certificate there'll be an issuer name. That will probably be the root certificate. You then go to that root certificate, this could be a company, whoever, and you ask for their certificate. On it will be their public key. You'll use their public key to check this certificate. If that checks out, then you know that this certificate was definitely signed by this root certificate. This root certificate is absolutely trusted, and because that's absolutely trusted, you have a chain all the way down to the device which you can now trust. So let's have a look at the signature in a bit more detail. So the certificate information read from the MCU contains information about the MCU, but very importantly this signature here. The signature has been encrypted by the certificate authority's private key, so that is the key that's held secret by that authority. Nobody can gain access to it. The signature can therefore be decrypted by the certificate authority's public key, by anybody of course, because you can just ask for it. So what has been encrypted in the signature of the certificate? So firstly, the certificate information is converted to a unique fixed data value. The process uses what we call a hash function, and this takes large amounts of arbitrary information and converts it to a fixed data size. This is the process here. So we take all the textual information of the certificate, put it through a hashing algorithm, and out pops a fixed size number, and that number is unique to this certificate. Secondly, the certificate's unique number created from the hash function is then encrypted using the certificate authority's private key. So we take that number that we output and then we sign it by the certificate authority's private key. Now only the certificate authority has this private key and could only have signed that information. The output of that is an encrypted number, this number basically encrypted, and this is what we call the signature, and that is the amount, that is the data that you will see on the certificate. So how do we do the verification? So basically you yourself, to check the certificate, will read the certificate, you will take all the textual information of that certificate, and you yourself will put it through a hashing algorithm, and out will pop a unique number for that hash. Then you will go to the certificate authority, you will get their public key from their certificate, you will take that public key and you will decrypt the signature information that's on the certificate. When you decrypt it, you will see a number will come out. That number should be the hash of the certificate. If these two numbers match, then you can be sure that this certificate is valid and it has been signed by this certificate authority. So, what have we found? The certificate could only have been created by the certificate authority because it can only be decrypted by their public key, and the public key of the microcontroller, that's this here, that's the key you're after, it has been validated by this certificate authority. So in summary, the public key, which is the one in the MCU, because this is where you've read the certificate, held in the certificate originates from the MCU as detailed in the additional information in the certificate. The certificate authority has checked the validity of this additional data held in the certificate using a correct PKI infrastructure. So we can trust that the information sent to us by the MCU, so that certificate that we read, you can trust that it's correct and has originated from a device that can be described by the additional information in the certificate. So once we've checked this signature, we know that all this information in here, which may include the microcontrollers, silicon ID and other information, and the public key, can be trusted and relates to that microcontroller. Well, I hope that's given you some background as to certificates and how we use them. Please visit our Secure Thingz website for other information covering other parts of IoT security and the secure world. Secure Thingz is an IAR systems company, and we deliver secure foundations for the IoT. We try to simplify secure design by use of our tools such as Embedded and C-Trust. We provide secure provisioning and programming and enhanced product lifecycle support. Thank you very much for listening to this webinar today. Please go to our website for further information, and I wish you a good day.